I want to talk a little bit about form in general. So there's different ways that we can relate to that, and I'm going to offer kind of three ways today. I imagine there's more, but I'm not going to say which one's right, but I'm just going to offer them is that these are different ways that people can approach this idea of God in form. Yeah. And the kind of theme is multi-logical thinking. Um, yeah. Can we just hold multiple perspectives and allow them all to kind of dig us into that deeper ineffable truth? So one that's really popular in the West, especially among people that um, maybe pride themselves on being intellectual, um, is this idea that all these different forms of gods, of these deities, that they're different archetypes um, that kind of point us to just the depths of, as maybe Jung called the collective unconscious, right? Um, and there is some weight to that, right? Like, um, even, in India, I mean, all sorts of people will talk about the different metaphorical meanings of all these different aspects of Hanuman's form, right? Even Hanuman's curly hair, I've heard it described as it's symbolic of the thrill of Hanuman's devotion. Yeah. And Hanuman's earrings, they're these heavy earrings, right? And they pull down his ears, and it shows that Hanuman's ears are ever ready to hear the stories of Ram. Yeah, and of course that mace, I mean, the weapons and the iconography um, are often, that's what destroys our ignorance, right? The five kleshas we talked about, right? That's what kind of removes those, um, right? The the thread, the sacred thread that Hanuman wears shows that Hanuman's presence is always, his mind is always in the absolute, is always in truth. Yeah. So we get that kind of metaphorical, um, these metaphorical layers of it. Um, and And there's an element too, right? I mean, if we see that, if we remember that Hanuman is devotion and service, that that's what Hanuman is. And of course, those two things aren't separate. For devotees, service is just a form of devotion. As I said this last time, like if we're really devoted to God and if we realize that God is everywhere, then you have to be of service, right? That means service to the earth. That means service to other people. Um, And if our devotion is really intense and sincere, we're probably going to look for all the ways that we're not yet viewing the world as a manifestation of God. Yeah. All the ways that we've kind of turned a blind eye to various peoples and their sufferings or various exploitations, different cultures on the planet. So, so we can view Hanuman as that, right? As like a form of devotion. And by looking at Hanuman, right, it's said to awaken these different qualities in us. And that's one way of looking at it. And, and then there's people like Joseph Campbell that talk about how ritual is really a way that we kind of bring down this mythological realm into reality, right? So by looking at the pictures of Hanuman, by singing to Hanuman, by offering Hanuman food, that we're doing something, we're programming our mind in a certain way, it's causing some change in us. Okay. So that's one way that we can relate to form. And I think for a lot of us in the West, that's kind of how we first start to wrap our head around it and how we first start to allow ourselves to get into it and to try it out. It seems to just make sense to us. Um, but what many of us find is after doing these practices for a while, is that although that still makes sense on some level, it doesn't really feel like it fully captures the truth. And so we start to move into these other areas that maybe at the beginning of our journey wouldn't have made sense to us. Yeah. And so um, there's another way that we can look all this, which is that Hanuman is a doorway to God. The name itself is a doorway. It is a perfect mirror. It's a perfect form. It's like a sonic murti. Yeah, it's a perfect manifestation of that ineffable presence in our heart. And by saying the name, we awaken that presence. Yeah? And that the visual form of Hanuman, by looking at a murti, by looking at an image, that too is a perfect mirror of our heart. And that the stories also are a perfect doorway in, perfect mirror of our heart. And in a way, that second one isn't that much different from the first. It just caused a little bit less explanation. Um, but for devotees who've been on the path for a while, um, there is a difference, and the difference is important. Um, but there's another way I want to offer too, and when you get to this way, you know that you've really drank the Kool-Aid. Um, this is the other thing that happens to many of us is we've been on the path for a while, and it just starts to make sense at some point that that yes, it's true that Hanuman is a perfect mirror of the heart, right? But in reality, all beings are a mirror of the heart. In reality, we're all one, right? And so, just as, but if Hanuman's a more perfect mirror, well, just as we consider other beings are real, like other beings with physical bodies that walk around, we view that they're real. At some point, we realize that Hanuman's not really any less real as a separate being as any of these other people. And then, it completely shifts at that point, because then when we say the name Hanuman, we're saying someone's name. Yeah, and we look at the form of Hanuman, we're looking at the form of someone. And when we sing the Hanuman Chalisa, we're singing to someone. And that's an interesting one, because just like if we have people in our life that we really love, like let's say we have partners, husbands, wives, kids. Sometimes we put their pictures in our wallet. Sometimes we put their pictures on our desk at our office, right, at our job. Um, and when we look at them, right, we feel love in our heart, and that's why we do that. You know, it's like it's nice to remember them and to keep them in our mind. And of course, if we're really in love with someone, sometimes we write them love poems or we sing them love songs. And so we start to realize that Hanuman is real, and then we just fall in love. And then we know all the other stuff is true, but it just doesn't seem to matter anymore. We're not actually singing to Hanuman for any purpose other than we're just in love with Hanuman. And if we offer Hanuman some fruits, um, we're offering Hanuman fruits the same way we would offer fruits to our lover. Yeah, and if we like want Hanuman's picture around, it's because we're in love with Hanuman and we want to remember Hanuman. Yeah, that's that realm of devotion. And of course, in that realm, right, it's said that doing all these things is good for us. But for the devotee, like that doesn't even really matter so much. It's just about the fact that we're in love. And of course, this is also where it gets really interesting, right? Because as it says in the Narada Bhakti Sutras, um, we don't practice devotion to get something else. We don't practice love to get something else. It is its own reward. So even though we often express devotion through duality, right? There's a certain language of devotion, right? I'm in love with you. That involves two people. That's a certain language of devotion. But bhav, the devotional mood that's awakened through that kind of love poetry, that dualistic love poetry, the bhav is a non-dual state. Yeah? It's a non-dual state. So what the teachings say is that we just keep falling in love, and that love just takes us over time, um, until it's the only thing that's left. But once we've fallen in love, um, it's not really about some goal anymore. Love has just overtaken our heart, and that kind of inner intelligence is just working its way. So, um, those are just a few ways that we can think about form, and I'm just inviting him into the space. Um, and often, I find myself kind of dancing between multiple perspectives, depending on, on where I'm at in the moment. Um, and this kind of multi-logical thinking, I want to say a few more things about this because it, it's integral into all of the Puranas and Vedic thought, and the fact that we have all these different sacred stories that say that this particular deity, whether it's Devi or Shiva or Sri Hari, right? They say that these deities are the highest deity, right? And then they place the other deities in relationship to that deity. Well, all these texts are considered sacred texts. Yeah, so there's this understanding, there's this inherent understanding um, of the relativity of language, right? What Alfred Korzybski called the map is not the territory. Our ideas about the universe are not the same as the universe itself, right? So when we're in love with someone, like like no one wants to hear on a date like, oh, you like you're pretty beautiful, like I've met other beautiful people and like they were cool too, but you're also pretty cool, and yeah, I think I want to keep hanging out with you. Like no one really wants to hear that, and we don't even really want to say that. Like when we're in love with someone, it's just like they actually just are the most beautiful person that's ever existed, and all of eternity, and we can have those moments. And sometimes that kind of language, that kind of devotional language, is actually the most accurate statement of truth. Um, and of course, in another situation, it's not going to be, right? If people are fighting wars over whose deity is the highest, um, it doesn't seem to me like that's a very high statement of truth. So we can see that a specific type of language can function in one situation one way, but in another situation it can function another way.